You're here to present some of the films made by your grandfather, Emeric Pressburger and Michael Powell. How old were you when you became aware of his films and how great they are?
Well, you know, in 1978, there was a retrospective, the first retrospective ever, I think, of Powell Pressburger films on British television on the BBC, and I was 10 years old. And I remember my dad went and rented one of the very first VHS recorders, and we recorded all those films, and I watched them, and most of them I thought were incredibly dull, because as a 10-year-old, you know, they're a bit sophisticated, to be honest. Things like Tales of Hoffman, which is an opera film, Red Shoes, which is a ballet film, Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, which is a complicated, intricate story set during the war. And it was only later on when my grandfather was quite old and quite ill when I was at university, and I was a member of the film club, and they happened to show Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, a restored version of that film. And I went to see it with a friend, and I was blown away, and I thought, bloody hell, he's really good. He's a genius. This is fantastic. What an amazing film. And I then went and got all the other films and watched them, and was kind of bowled over. But unfortunately, my grandfather was so old and kind of, you know, a bit senile by that stage, I couldn't really talk to him about the films in detail. And what you got to remember is that all the time, actually, between the sort of 1960s or late 50s even, up until the 80s, Powell and Pressburger were completely forgotten. And they were kind of not just out of fashion, but they were seen as kind of bad taste somehow. And I think because in some ways the films were ahead of their time, and they were so unique and so kind of authored by the two of them, and so outside of the kind of the mainstream direction of British cinema. So my grandfather hadn't really talked about his own films that much, because in a funny way, I wouldn't say he was embarrassed by them, he was proud of them, but he didn't think anyone was interested in a funny way, which was a bit sad. So when he died, I thought, it's my job to help perpetuate his memory and the memory of those films. And I wrote a book, actually. I left university, there was another recession in the early 90s, and I couldn't get a job. I wanted to be a journalist. Thought, well, I'll write a book. And I wrote a book about him, which luckily I found a publisher for, and it was at that time, actually, I came to Czechoslovakia, as it was then, to research his life, because he spent a few years here at university in the 20s. And he really moved through all of Eastern Europe, ending up in Germany, and then left Germany during the Nazi rise to power in 1933, went to France, ended up in England. So I retraced that journey.
Would you say his career influenced your career and that of your brother Andrew as well? He's a successful producer, of course.
Yeah, I think it didn't directly influence us. I think it influenced us just because we were aware that film was a job that you could do, that it was possible to get into making films, and we were both just fascinated by movies when we were growing up. We used to watch a lot of movies, and my brother really from an early age wanted to be in films, and I didn't so much. I want to say I wanted to be a journalist, but it was actually the influence of writing this book about my grandfather and researching cinema history that made me more interested in film. And actually the first film I ever did was a documentary about my grandfather, the first sort of proper film, and that documentary set me on the course of making other documentaries. And so in a way he provided me with my career, but not in the kind of obvious way you would think as a direct of inspiration, but in a kind of backdoor kind of way.
After a series of documentaries, you made your first feature film in the mid-2000s with The Last King of Scotland. Mm-hmm. What led you to make that transition?
Well, I'd made a couple of feature documentaries for the cinema, which had been successful. One won an Oscar, and then the next one won the BAFTA, which is the British Film Award for the Best British Film of the Year, and made quite a lot of money, which is the key thing, because of course producers see that your film made some money, and they think, oh, I'll back him for something else. So I had offers from people to do a feature film, to do a fictional feature film, and I hadn't, to be honest, I hadn't been that interested in making fiction up to that time. I'd been very passionate about documentary, but I thought, well, you know, it's an opportunity, I should take it. I might not get another opportunity to make a fiction film. And so I got together with a producer who owned the rights to this book, The Last King of Scotland, and worked with the scriptwriter, who was a fantastic screenwriter, who it was really his first film, called Peter Morgan, who has gone on to be very well known for things like The Queen, and what was the other film he made recently? Frost Nixon. Did you see that? So I was interested in making a film in Africa. I'd travelled quite a bit in East Africa, and so I was attracted to the idea of making this film about Idi Amin, and the relationship between him and his fictional Scottish doctor, played by James McAvoy. And partly because it was it was an opportunity to make a film about the West's relationship with Africa in the post-colonial era, and to show the kind of exploitative attitude that I think a lot of Westerners have when they travel to somewhere like Uganda, or I guess to any developing nation, where suddenly they go there and you can be a bit of a failure back home, but actually you go there and suddenly you're the powerful guy, you've got a bit of money in your pocket, you've got white skin, and you can get yourself into all sorts of positions of power very, very easily without actually questioning whether or not you're doing the right thing, or whether the people who are giving you that power are ethically corrupt or not. And in the case of Amin, obviously he was very corrupt.
Last year, your first Hollywood film, I guess, came out, State of Play.
Yeah.
How did you find that switch from a smaller film to the big league, so to speak?
Well, it was a fascinating experience. Again, often I take decisions just because it's a new experience, and this was certainly a new experience. It was a very well-funded, expensive Hollywood movie in the old tradition with lots of stars in it: Russell Crowe, Ben Affleck, Rachel McAdams, Jeff Daniels, Helen Mirren. And it was an opportunity to make a film about a subject that was very, very close to me, which is the importance of journalism and the necessity that the society has really for a strong press and strong investigative journalism. You can't have a properly functioning free society, I think, without a strong press, and yet we can see the old media collapsing around us. Newspapers have declining circulations, they're cutting their budgets, they're not allowing their journalists to do the kinds of things that they used to do, to spend the amount of time they used to spend on stories. So I thought that's a really good subject for a thriller. And so that was what I did in that film. Make a kind of old-fashioned thriller set in a newspaper, but maybe implication of the film was maybe this is the last of these kind of films you're going to see. Maybe you're not going to see another film with a journalist as a hero, because journalists might not exist in another 5 years or another 10 years.
Finally, what's next for you?
Well, I've just finished shooting a film, or no, just finished actually post-producing a film. I finished it on Friday. I'm here for a little break actually after finishing that, and it's called The Eagle of the Ninth. The Ninth Legion is about. There's a kind of myth in the north of England that the Ninth Legion of the Roman army marched north into Scotland in the 2nd century and disappeared, was completely wiped out. And this story then says that this led to the building of Hadrian's Wall, the famous wall that cuts off the north of England from Scotland, that was built by the Emperor Hadrian. And I've made a film set in that period around that myth. It's based on a book that I loved as a kid, actually, called The Eagle of the Ninth. I said that before I did it. It's based on a book that I loved as a kid by the same title, The Eagle of the Ninth, written by Rosemary Sutcliffe. And it's a film, we've got a wonderful cast. We've got Channing Tatum, Jamie Bell, Donald Sutherland, Tahar Rahim from A Prophet. I don't know if you saw that wonderful French film. He plays my bad guy, and he speaks all in Gaelic. I got him to learn Gaelic. And so you won't recognize him. He's covered in makeup and has a Mohican and speaks Gaelic.